Good morning. Let's start with some bad news. Rust. This generation of Corsa definitely can't keep the nasty rust away from itself, which results in attacking almost the entire car. While, for example, doors, especially in the 5-door version, bonnet or wheel arches are not big problems. In the small Opel, the sills and windscreen also corrode. And although in many other cars the choice of metallic paint allows us to hope that the body will be better protected against corrosion than in the case of ordinary paint without an additional charge, this advice does not apply to the Corsa D. The most susceptible to corrosion of doors and sills are supposedly the 2009-2010 models, while corrosion of the less structurally important bonnet primarily affects Opels from the years 2010 to 2012. In addition, problems are caused by electrics and electronics, mainly due to moisture, and mainly in pre-facelift cars where water gets into the fuse box. Sometimes the alternator or engine control unit in petrol Corsas can cause problems. The suspension can be quite loud, e.g. the shock absorber bump stops can knock, and the metal rubber bushes can break. Also typical for the Corsa D is play in the rods or incorrect operation of the ABS system due to corrosion of the system's sensor rings, the so-called crowns. In general, in this category, we are dealing rather with ordinary wear and tear and rust. You need to check at what stage. It may be just a harmless corrosion coating, than with actual defects. It should be added that chassis parts for this Opel model are usually very reasonably priced. The braking system itself does not cause any problems, except for the previously mentioned ABS issue. The following petrol or gas engines were used in the City Opel: 1.0 60 HP, 1.2 69 HP, 1.2 LPG 80-85 HP on petrol, 75 to 77 HP on LPG depending on the year, 1.4 90 HP, 1364 CM3, 1.4 87 or 101 HP, 1398 CM3, 1.4 LPG 90 HP on petrol, 86 HP on LPG, 1364 CM3. 1.4 turbo 120 HP. Interestingly, it has the same capacity as the older naturally aspirated 1.4 to 1364 cm 3. 1.6 turbo 150, 192, or 211 HP respectively for the versions GSI, OPC, OPC Nürburgring Edition. Most of the versions in the range of this model were sold optionally or as standard in EcoFlex versions, i.e. redesigned to reduce fuel consumption. The scope of changes in EcoFlex models compared to the regular ones was slightly different in almost every Opel model, but the most obvious ones include the presence of the start-stop system. All engines of the 4th generation Opel Corsa have a timing chain, but this is not a special advantage, because it has a low durability. Among the typical faults, there are also ignition cassette failures in the 1.0 and 1.2 engines. After higher mileage, oil consumption also appears. In general, however, there are no engines that should be clearly discouraged. The closest to this is the base 1.0, but not because of the severity of problems, but because it is weak, not very economical, and due to its 3-cylinder design, it also has a worse operating culture than all the other engines, and sounds exceptionally unpleasant even for an R3 engine, although this is of course a subjective matter. There is also no direct fuel injection engine in the range, including the top 1.6 turbo units. There is multi-point fuel injection everywhere. This makes it easier to install LPG systems in cars that do not have them, although it may be worth looking for those that have LPG from new, and means that you do not have to worry about potential carbon deposits. In this model, Opel used the following diesel engines: 1.3 CDTI, 75 to 95 HP, 1.7 CDTI, 125-130 HP. The 1.3 CDTI units with 75 and 95 horsepower were also available in EcoFlex versions. The 1.3 engines get good reviews, but their typical problem is a stretching timing chain. At higher mileage, typical for Corsas with diesels, regardless of the version, the turbine, injectors, particulate filter or fuel pump on the high-pressure side may fail. You could say that this is a diesel standard, apart from this chain. The 1.7 CDTI Corsas have of course incomparably better performance. They also have a timing belt drive, and, interestingly, a water pump that is not driven by the same belt, so its potential failure will not destroy the engine, if only we notice it in time. However, the 1.7 CDTI engines remain a bit more exotic than the 1.3 CDTI, and as a result, there are garages that are reluctant to undertake repairs, and the prices of servicing these units are usually higher. Those interested in a diesel must therefore decide what is more important to them: better access to service or more pleasant everyday use, especially on out-of-town routes. The Opel Corsa D was offered with 5 types of gearboxes. These were 5-speed manual gearbox, standard for all 1.0, 1.2, and 1.4, 1.4T engines, except the 85 HP 1.2 EcoFlex variant, otherwise standard on the 75 and 95 HP 1.3 diesels. 6-speed manual gearbox, standard on the petrol 1.6 turbo, 90 HP 1.3 CDTI, 95 HP 1.3 CDTI EcoFlex, and both 1.7 CDTI. 5-speed EasyTronic automated gearbox, standard on the 85 HP 1.2 EcoFlex, optional on the 80 HP 1.2. 6-speed EasyTronic automated gearbox, option on the 90 HP 1.3 CDTI. 4-speed automatic gearbox, optional on the 90 HP 1.4 with a capacity of 1364 cm3, and on the 101 HP 1.4 with a capacity of 1398 cm3. The 5-speed manual doesn't cause any major problems, although the precision of gear changes can be debatable. It doesn't have to be a matter of failure or wear. I myself drove an almost new Corsa D 1.2, in which changing gears was like changing a stick in a bucket of rubble. The situation is much worse in the case of the 6-speed manual gearbox. This is the M20 gearbox, the smaller brother of the M32 gearbox, known for its problems, used in larger Opels, among others. The M20 shares the M32's problems with bearings, which is a result of lubrication problems. The oil should be changed absolutely every 60,000 kilometers, and preferably even more often. But if the bearings are already audible or signs of wear are visible, e.g. visible movement of the gear stick, then you need to get ready to replace all the bearings, which means a 4-digit expense, probably with a 3 at the front. Note, if you notice shaking or shifting of the gear stick, it is worth checking the driveline mounts first, as they can have the same effect and are cheaper to replace. The cause of problems with the M20 gearbox is too little oil from the factory, and in addition, according to mechanics, the wrong oil. In addition, the design of the gearbox itself is faulty, and the fact that Opel does not recommend changing the oil in the gearbox. In 2012, the M20 gearbox was improved. Add more oil channels. EasyTronic gearboxes can be summed up briefly. Avoid them. Like most of these types of automated transmissions, they have a mediocre work culture, and if they break down or go out of adjustment, and it will happen sooner or later, it is difficult to get them back to a usable condition. Sources are generally silent on the failure rate of the 4-speed hydrokinetic, which is probably due both to its low popularity and supply, and the fact that it shouldn't cause any major problems. Although digging through Opel and Vauxhall user forums reveals that even this ASIN gearbox, AW60-40 AF13, is not entirely free of problems. Nevertheless, if someone needs an automatic in a Corsa, this 4-speed will be a much better choice than the aforementioned automated gearboxes. If you browse other sources describing this model, you will probably notice that the ratings given to it are rather low and usually do not exceed 3+ on the school rating scale. Due to problems with corrosion and gearboxes, this is understandable, but if you manage to find a car without rust and well-maintained, it can be quite a smart choice. There are no clearly bad or unsuccessful engines in the range, repairs are cheap, and the Opel Corsa D drives quite pleasantly. And if you know of any common errors, your comments are welcome.
Camipro-Website ist Katalog aller Automarken, Motoren, Getriebe, was bricht und bei welchem Kilometerstand. Welche Pakete können Ihre Tasche hart belasten? Dieses und vieles mehr über Autos erfahren Sie auf Camipro.